Northbourne Avenue and the light rail going past. It's a spectacular day, actually. Spectacular.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in Melbourne.
Yeah, and 10 straight days. Thank you, Melburnians, for all you've done. It's been amazing. Okay, we're live. Okay, welcome everyone, and welcome to this very special edition for our country edition. I would like to welcome our guests Aaron Roberts and Kim Bridgland from our country edition, I should say, and artist Daniel Boyd. Where have you gone, Daniel? We'll come into the screen in a minute. I'm Alex Sloan, and I wish to acknowledge I'm on Ngunnawal country, Ngunnawal Ngambri land that's never been ceded. I wish to thank elders past and present, and acknowledge all the work that has gone before, and particularly welcome and acknowledge Indigenous people who are joining us today. And to explain for our country is a collaboration between Kudjala and Gangalu artist Daniel Boyd for a new pavilion at the Australian War Memorial here in Canberra to recognise and commemorate the military service and experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who have fought to protect their country. The sculptural pavilion is set behind a ceremonial fire pit with an 11-metre diameter circular stone field. On approach, visitors encounter a 10-metre wide two-way mirror glass facade covered in thousands of mirrored circular lenses that reflect the viewer and the memorial across its surface. Behind the glass veil is an intimate contemplative space with a curved back wall and seating constructed of black pigmented rammed earth on which to see back through the thousands of transparent lenses to the fire and memorial ground below. It's absolutely stunning. With permission from the Ngunnawal elders, an open invitation was sent to every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nation for soil from their lands to be offered into the ceremonial chamber at the centre of the pavilion, which penetrates deep into the ground below the work. In this way, each nation is unified together in this place where a piece of real country can act as symbolic remains of the fallen who've died in the protection of their country. For our country is a space to contemplate and commemorate Indigenous connection to country and the sacrifice that Indigenous serving men and women have made and continue to make in the protection of this country. For our country occupies a prominent position at the Australian War Memorial Sculpture Gardens in Canberra. And Design Canberra has made every effort to celebrate and promote Indigenous craft, design and art and architecture. And we're delighted that For Our Country won the 2020 Canberra Medallion. It's a really prestigious award here. And just last week was announced the winner of the Nicholas Merkett Award for Small Project Architecture at the 2020 National Architecture Awards. We're sorry that you can't join us in person, but we'd love to hear about, we'd love you to hear about this project, which I think is going to go on and win even more awards. I'd really like anyone who's watching via our live stream on Facebook to ask questions. We'll collect those questions and then we'll put them to our special guests at the end of this session. But that's enough from me this morning. Over to our presenters. And from the Edition office, we have Aaron Roberts and Kim Bridgland, and also from Sydney. Hi, thanks to you both. And coming in from Sydney is artist Daniel Boyd. Hi, Dan. Hi, all of you. I'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you all, and especially at the start of NAIDOC Week. I think it's a wonderful time to talk about this particular project. From our perspective, from Edition Office, as architects, it's so important to have an understanding that we're working from within the context of this nation's colonial legacy. The nation, Australia, was formed within the framework of great deceit and of great trauma to its Indigenous inhabitants. And to allow this to happen, a narrative had to be constructed within the collective mind of those advancing the colonial project, that the original occupants of this land were not sufficiently worthy. In fact, that they were less than human, and that they had no rights to the lands that they had been caretakers of for over 60,000 years. The underlying premise of this false narrative still exists today and continues to devalue the lives of First Nations people. We are at a point in our history where the memory of this trauma has been largely removed from the story that this nation has tried to tell itself. And by removing that memory of systematic dispossession of land, life and culture, we have a society with a profoundly unbalanced playing field where the injustices of the last 230 years are hardwired into our economic, education, judicial, incarceration systems. Our distorted national mythology perpetuates this as it continues to centre the lived experience, the gaze of the non-Indigenous world, and continues to petition the Indigenous gaze and their lived experience as other and as a fringe issue. There is an immense range of cultural and historical narratives embedded within the built environment and within the sites that we seek to build upon as architects. But our architectural heritage and the monuments that we celebrate within it almost exclusively reinforce and legitimise the stories of colonial settlement and its European heritage. As our towns and cities are the backdrop to where we live and grow, we generally accept these stories without questioning who or what they represent, because they are there, because they're large, they're old, they're visible, they gain legitimacy, and importantly, what has been forgotten or ignored does not. As architects, or whether we understand that or not, we play a huge, significant role in the narrative formation of this country. Each and every project we design is an implicit cultural and political act. So architecture has an extremely important role, not only in sensitively responding to the needs of the communities that it serves, but in giving presence to marginalised voices and their lived experience within the collective story. And with that presence, with the centering of the Indigenous gaze, First Nations gaze, comes greater authority to have a stronger level of political self-determination. I think that's just really important for us to bring context to this memorial and I guess the field that it represents. So talking about that context of the colonial project and that legacy of trauma, I think it's important to talk about this memorial both in the frame of reference of the formal military service that so many Indigenous diggers have provided enormous sacrifice for, but also the same service and sacrifice that exists within the frontier wars, and with an understanding this was not a passive event or a passive occupation of Australian lands. This was certainly a conflict. That left a pretty large, scar and trauma. These are all sites from the University of Newcastle Frontier Wars project, or a mapping of sites of those conflicts from around Australia. And coming back to, I guess, the context of that, so many Indigenous men and women, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women, still signed up for service, even when they were considered not eligible to vote, still considered flora and fauna in this country, who we're seeing here as Quanda Wukamumun, an Aboriginal rights activist, Army Corporal Udguru Nunukal, or Kath Walker, as she was named at birth. She enlisted in the Australian Women's Armed Services in 1942. And in that service, gained access to so much traditional or training and educational opportunities that were otherwise entirely unavailable to her as an Aboriginal woman. Another story is that of Walter Christopher Chris George Saunders, who's from Warrnambool in Victoria. He's a Gunditjmara man and signed up for the Australian Imperial Armed Forces and later transferred to the 3rd Machine Gun Battalion. The stories that he told of mateship and of adventure and opportunities, again, unavailable to him here in Australia, were transferred to his son, who signed up for World War II and continued that legacy and service from an Australian Indigenous perspective. Another Gunditjmara soldier is Herbert Starr Lovett. He served as a machine gunner on the Western Front during World War II, and then signed up again, for the First World War, and then signed up again for the Second World War. So an immense amount of service. But when he returned, under the land, or he was denied land under the soldier settlement scheme, which was administered by the Victorian government. So this was a settlement scheme which gave land to servicemen and women when they returned to Australia. This was denied to Herbert Starr Lovett and all other Indigenous diggers, while at the same time his traditional Kudjala lands were being taken from him and his people. So this is an extraordinary context, I suppose, to this memorial, and sets a background for a large level of commemoration and ritual and of communication of those stories in balancing with the commemoration and remembrance of their particular service. The image we're looking at right now from the far right of screen is John Lovett, the son of Herbert Starr Lovett. And we have squadron leader and Gundungurra elder Gary Oakley at the centre of the screen. And on the left, we have Dave Arden, who's the great nephew of Captain Reg Saunders, who I mentioned earlier. They're standing on Mount Ainslie at an informal Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander war memorial, which was built by a community, but away from the Aboriginal, or the formal war memorial site itself, because there was no place for them to acknowledge their history and their extraordinary level of service, despite overcoming all of those obstacles to do it. So this brings us to the work itself. And I'm going to let you take over here and talk through the project in the context of the war memorial itself.
Great, thank you. So what I might do is give a brief overview of the project before I hand over to Dan to talk specifically about his involvement and his wonderful artworks and art practice, and how that relates back to the facade and indeed the project as a whole. So if we move to the next slide, we can see here the context of the Australian War Memorial at the bottom left of the screen, and then to the top middle we see Mount Ainslie, where there was the informal war memorial that was shown in the images prior. And we feel that it's very important that the project links to these greater contexts, both visually and has some connective tissue to them experientially. The siting of the project is to the left of the sort of grounds here at the War Memorial. And if we zoom in one more step, you can see it located in between various other memorial sculptures. In plan form, we were really interested in the experience of the project being singular yet complex in the elements that it's hoping to describe. But at a very basic level here, we see the forecourt, which is the top half of the circle, the stone field, the basalt stone field, the line, which is the interface between the stone field. In front of the glass line is the fire pit, the ceremonial fire pit, and the earth chamber. And in behind this, the screen, we have a very sort of calming space that allows you to enjoy the interface from an internal view. And what we're hoping to do there is to provide very different experiences, a more contemplative and isolated space, and a more public interface at the front of the memorial. If we go to the next slide, Kim. These start to show the kinds of experiences that you have as you first approach the memorial. So we have the glass skin, and then we have the heavy earth, as if the wall itself had been swept up from the ground plane and captures and collects the visitors. And the next slide starts to show the interface of the soil receptacle, which was alluded to earlier, whereby community can bring an offering to the memorial, which links all of those fallen soldiers and their family and their community together in one spot here in Canberra. I'll pass over to Dan to start to talk about this particular painting and his work on the project.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so I guess this painting is of a landscape in Vanuatu, an island that my great-grandfather comes from. I guess the idea behind the work is multiple ways of looking or seeing. So it's about these lenses, how we perceive our relationship to, in this case, a particular landscape, and how there are all these individual points of perception that kind of make up a collective understanding of something. And so that kind of works into the memorial in the same way that there are all these different narratives or ways of seeing that are able to engage a place of commemoration for all of those people that have fought for their country, and acknowledge all of those personal and collective relationships to something, so that the surface of the facade, yeah. So it's just it's a two-way mirror, and it's broken down into this idea of multiplicity or plurality, and what it kind of does is creates a situation where there is an allowance for all of these different understandings or relationships to this particular memorial, and so and it's also about people being able to engage with an understanding of these relationships across time and space, and allow those relationships to happen through this this kind of space that's in between, as a language, this space in between the lenses, and create like a duality, and acknowledge that without the other, there is no kind of plurality or kind of multiple readings of a particular thing. So I think also what is important about the memorial is the use of light, and this, in particular, the sun and the relationship to the sun that it has. It becomes a structure that's constantly evolving. What you see through the facade of the memorial changes at different times of the day. There are, different situations where the light enters into the pavilion. And these are all about that duality, and they're kind of trying to understand a certain this idea of like a beauty and difference, and that we can create situations where we acknowledge that beauty. So
It's interesting in that way, Dan, where the idea of self is seen in that. So and maybe you could talk a little bit about that in relation to how you see yourself projected in the mirrored surface, and you also the light and the way that light comes through it gets projected onto yourself while you're in the chamber.
Yeah, so you become aware of your relationship to the memorial through light and through your movement and your relationship to the structure. When you kind of traverse the front of the pavilion, you see yourself kind of transferred across the surface through this rhythm of relationships to all the individual lenses, and so you as the viewer activate what you're kind of engaging with. And that's an important part of the memorial, I think, is this engagement through.
What I find extraordinary from experiencing the memorial from the exterior, from the, I guess, the position of the stone field, is this this incredible facade. This point cloud, it seems to act as like a fissure, or it acts as some kind of a crack in space-time. It sounds really abstract, but when you're seeing it, the landscape you're in and your own reflection, in the way that I felt it, it's not just reflected back to you as it would be in any other mirror. It's displaced. It's kind of there's this layer of this point cloud, and you and your landscape are positioned on the other side of it and inside of it, and looking back at yourself, and it seems to be, for me, it seems to be an extraordinary conduit to experiencing or contemplating a different time and a different place, and therefore really going through a personal memorial or communion process with understanding. Different sites of conflict, different sites of trauma, and different levels of sacrifice, which is how we hoped the memorial would operate. That it wouldn't be telling a specific story, but it would allow individuals to, or provide a framework to allow opportunities to commemorate and understand and connect to the histories of this sacrifice, and of the history of Indigenous experience in the Indigenous gaze in general. And it's a profound way of displacing, your sense of self and projecting it as other and returning it, that I find quite incredible.
Well, I think that's the exciting thing about it, is that you see yourself reflected through what Dan spoke about before, this idea of the multiplicity of lenses. You actually see yourself within each of those lenses, and you can think about or project the possibility of understanding or allowing space for other people's way of mourning or understanding of loss, or whatever it might be, or their different cultural perception of it. And then when viewing, I think it does that at both a sort of personal level when you're visiting, but also does that to the landscape and the particular context that it is in that it fragments and abstracts the war memorial proper behind the pavilion and re-represents it through this different lens, these series or this multiplicity of lenses that have been put forward. And then equally, when you're inside the pavilion, you have the same scenario happening whereby Siri tries to tell us what's going on. Sorry. It's that same scenario happening where the pixelated light field is projected onto you, and you have that sense that those different viewpoints and those different understandings are literally thrown upon your skin. So I think it's perhaps interesting to talk about that, Dan.
Yeah, so I guess what is important is this kind of, this split, or this like duality of perception. Seeing yourself within the landscape, and then seeing yourself like your relationship to it through perception from the interior. So you're splitting this relationship to the memorial through your relationship to the different surfaces and relationships to light. It's also like a split of the gaze and how you see or understand perception for me, and the way that it allows multiple entry points is kind of key for me, to allow as many people as possible to be able to engage with the pavilion, the memorial. So
that was a hugely important way that it was designed to be as inclusive as possible, in that it didn't specifically reference certain stories or certain people, that it was that even the architectural language was reduced back to a very elemental thing. It was a perfect circle split with a horizontal line. And by doing that, it was a very conscious decision to make sure the architectural language didn't carry familiar metaphors that we see, kind of architectural, design motifs that we are familiar with, that carry cultural and historical connotations. We wanted to make sure that those were absent, because the elemental language is so familiar and so universal, that it was empty of any kind of specific cultural or familiar kind of experience, and therefore your own experiences, all you were able to rely upon when you go there. And it forces you to understand and engage with the work, or invites you to engage with the work in its own terms. What we're seeing now on the screen is the morning light of every single sunrise as it rises over Mount Ainslie and penetrates the work, fills the interior with this point cloud of light and bathes you in there while you're seated within this pigmented round earth chamber. It creates this space of quiet introspection. It's a very protective and comforting interior space, that kind of, you become bathed in this light in that period of time in the morning when the light comes through. And then as the work responds to the sunlight throughout the seasons, throughout the day, it acts as a sundial of sorts, where the sun shifts and moves within the interior of the chamber as the sun moves and relates to the work every day. I
think that idea... Sorry, Kim, you go, mate.
I was just saying, this is an image taken on the day before the opening, of the first diggers, the first black diggers walking through and being bathed in that, the new daylight washing through. I think it was an incredibly profound and moving moment for everyone who was there at the time, of what that first experience of this space represented.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the nature of how this particular element of the work performs, and links back to that idea that Dan was talking about earlier of deep time, or kind of like really universal kind of systems, and that notion of how you might capture that and kind of purvey it across different kind of cultural understandings. Dan, you spoke a bit about that notion earlier, and that I think the thing that fascinates me too is this idea of the in-between spaces and what that does, not rather than the actual lens or the light point itself. Is that something you want to talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, so just acknowledging that space that is between points of perception, and those lenses are kind of like little portals into different relationships with time and space. And so understanding your relationship see something come through these projections of your knowledge and your relationships to the memorial. So what I was saying with this beauty and difference is kind of, everyone has their own personal relationship to something, and whether it's a direct relationship to it, like these guys that are in the diggers that got to experience it the day before. It's allowing all of these narratives to kind of have a relationship to the space, and so that's what that kind of that duality of perception, or splitting that gauge is all about, and using perception to do that.
Yeah. And Kim, I think you were going to start to talk about maybe some of the materiality, particularly, I guess, the stone field, and how that has a kind of dual representation.
Certainly. So this stone field at the front of the memorial that I guess situates or frames, I guess, the collective and public gathering space at the front of the memorial. It serves a couple of purposes. One of them is to physiologically slow you down when you walk into that zone and come into close proximity with the earth vessel and the fireplate and the mirrored screen itself. I guess the coarseness of the stones in this space are where, kind of require you to come into your body and come into the present moment and become, I don't know, temporally situated in the work. But in terms of the material specificity, these are all basalt stones. This is all every one of these stones is a flint stone that is can be shaped and sharpened, and are the exact same material that's been used across Australia as a tool and as a weapon of war for over 60,000 years within Australia. So this material acts as I guess as a site of nascent or potential or fallen weapons of war from an Indigenous perspective, both commemorating that active service in conflict in a formal sense, but certainly specifically commemorating the sense of sacrifice and service in the protection of the country during the frontier wars, during that process of colonial dispossession. So there's a quite a significant meaning in a number of realms in terms of what this stone field means and how it performs. And at the centre of that is this small circle. This is, I guess, the heart and the centre of the entire memorial. Is a ceremonial fireplate, a cast bronze ceremonial fireplate. And what you're seeing at the left of screen is the earth vessel in its open position. Typically it's sealed. There's a cast bronze lid, and the work is securely and environmentally sealed, so it's a sealed, secure earth receptacle. But when it's open for ceremony, this is what's encountered, is this cast bronze mouth that penetrates into the ground and has a shape and a curvature to it so that light can never penetrate to the bottom. So your experience of when earth is offered is almost like you're pouring earth directly into the ground. There is no end to, I guess, to the depth of this space. It's been designed also in such a way so that this cast bronze earth, the mouth of this earth vessel can be removed, and the vessel below can be sealed and archived, and a new vessel put in place so that there's never an end point. It'll never fill up. There'll always be an opportunity, and while this site remains active for the next 100 or more years, for community to always come as required for ceremony and bring earth from their country. So we see that it's incredibly important that it's active, it's ongoing, it's a living interaction to bring earth to this site, rather than a static, I guess, memorial in terms of a connection only to the past. It's an ongoing active contribution and I guess, and active recentering of that connection.
It might be worth.
So that's
so
that's the end of the presentation. We'd really love some question and answers if there's an opportunity.
This is the Design Canberra Festival, and we're talking about the beautiful, beautiful work for our country at the Australian War Memorial. And I have with me from the Additions Office, the Architectural Office, Aaron Roberts and Kim Bridgland, and Daniel Boyd is the artist. And a question from Nikki from Facebook Live. Thank you so much for sharing the story of this installation. Fascinating to hear the thought, process, research and stories behind it. What were the artists and architects' personal perspectives on reconciliation before the project, and how did the project impact this understanding and level on a personal level? So fairly big question there for you all. Who wants to go there
absolutely.
first?
Well, Dan, did you want to start and we'll kind of follow on that one?
So Kim and I were personal friends before we started on this project, and I guess it's it was a lot of things that we haven't spoken about, and it kind of came about through our relationship to this project. So, we both learned, I think, a tremendous deal from each other, and hopefully this is kind of just the beginning of our collaborations, and we'll see how we go.
Kim, did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. It was such a pleasure, and on so many levels, and an honour to work with Dan, but also to be a facilitator for this project. Working towards reconciliation has been a hugely important thing for Anne and I personally, and for our practice from the outset of forming Edition Office. It's been frames. I guess we consciously frame our work and the way we do it. That everything we do exists on First Nations land, and every work we do, whether it's a private house to a public work like this, is an inherently political thing because it exists within the context of history and conflict in this country. To be allowed the opportunity to work with Dan on this work, it was such a privilege to be able to put forward such an acute response to that act, both in terms of creating a work that could deal with and allow people to commemorate and to understand the enormity and the weight of Australia's frontier wars conflict, as well as understand the enormity of Indigenous and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander formal military service, and the profound obstacles they overcame to do that, and the profound social inequity that was happening at the same time. But parallel to that, so there's this kind of enormous nation scale level of commemoration that needs to happen here, at the same level as those families who are commemorating their loved ones need to be able to use this memorial for a personal, a very personal, introspective level, and the work needed to be able to provide that enormous scale difference between the personal needs of mourning and commemoration and the nation's needs for mourning and commemoration, to go through that truth-telling process together and that healing process that comes through it. And parallel to that, there's that huge level of truth-telling and knowledge sharing from a non-Indigenous to an Indigenous perspective. And in terms of acts of reconciliation, that's the most important thing. It's the weight, the burden of the distance we all need to move is upon the non-Indigenous community to engage, to understand, and through that, I think the most important thing is knowledge sharing and truth telling, an educational process where people can understand the gaze of the other, the lived experience of the Indigenous community. So it was a huge honour for us to be able to play some role in the design of this work, to be a part of that ongoing reconciliation process.
Aaron, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in the discussion around reconciliation, and I think it's really been a great honour to be involved in the project with Dan and with all of the other people associated with the project to actually make a move in that regard, rather than just continuing a conversation, actually doing something which really highlights the possibility of dialogue. And I guess, yeah, I feel like it's a good step towards that. And I reiterate Kim's words in the sense that we all need to take that responsibility of making those steps and making real and honest moves and gestures towards that. And I think the other element of that is that as architects, there's confliction there's a kind of conflicted kind of position in that a lot of our work is being carried out on unceded lands and part of the greater colonial project and which is ongoing, and we need to be very aware that's happening. And so it's nice to kind of, it's important to be able to see that and to be able to make work which acknowledges that, and I guess in many ways it's a sort of a real awakening oneself to see the realities of that via doing a project like this.
And just before we go to the next question, Dan, for you to work on an architectural project as an artist, that must have been an amazing thing for you.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of visual language, it's kind of been leading me in that direction anyway, and so it was the perfect opportunity to kind of to see how it translated, and I was very happy with how everything has turned out. So yeah, I think there's definitely other opportunities to kind of engage with the language of architecture.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is from Rachel on Facebook Live, saying this is a beautiful and important project. Thank you. And I'd love to know more about the consultation process with community, what you learned from the experience and how it shaped the outcomes.
This process, it came up, it was in an invited, what was it called, Dan? It was a competition to submit proposals. So there was an invited competition that Dan and Yumani Scarce and a number of other significant contemporary Indigenous artists were invited to put forward work. That's when Dan reached out to us, and we kind of and we worked together to put forward a concept that was unanimously selected. So in presenting that to the Ngunnawal Council of Elders, the a curatorial body of Indigenous elders and art and Indigenous art curatorial body, there was, I guess, unanimous support both in selecting this project to go forward, but in supporting it as it was. I think there was no. I think it was so clear what the intention was and how the work needed to operate, that the only change that happened actually was going through that curatorial body and through the client actually supporting the work to get a little bit larger. It was actually, because it was commissioned, or the process began as a sculpture commission, it was, I think the War Memorial intended for it to be smaller in scale, but through a design process, we highlighted that actually it needed to be larger. It needed it needed an architectural scale. It needed to rise above the sculptural commission that was its roots, and that was holistically supported. So the consultation process through, I guess, was one of wholehearted support from the community that were advising the project.
See and to hear their responses to the work in many ways, in that it was doing exactly what we thought it might do, and that was that different members of the stakeholder group and the war memorial and the elders and so forth, were all seeing and experiencing different things that the memorial was doing, and we felt that it was important that it could take on that difference, that multiplicity that we were talking about before, and it was evident in the feedback that it was through the process.
Did Dan want to comment there just before we go to the next question? Was that just not getting any audio?
I think we've lost
Dan, you're on mute.
No, we've got him. Got him back.
It was a tremendous experience to see the people that had served for their country experience it on the opening day of the pavilion memorial. What we had set out to do had kind of laid out on that day for me in a very I was very excited to see how all of these people had the opportunity to engage the memorial from different points of view. So I was very happy with the outcome.
But just, you're fading a bit in and out there, Dan, with your microphone. If we can just, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So what I was saying was that it was a tremendous opportunity to see all of these different people from different places across this country, see all of their different perceptions of this pavilion memorial and what it meant, what it could mean to them. It was a great experience the day of the opening.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Megan, saying there's a lot of debate around the Australian War Memorial and their huge redevelopment works. Within this debate, an area which is contested is the value of memorials to people who've been touched by war. How do you hope For Our Country will help with healing, hope and recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? Who wants to have a go at that one? It's a great big question.
I think the
Dan?
space of acknowledgement the space of acknowledgement acts as a way into the future as well as being connected to the past. I think there's a relationship through the kind of how the pavilion is in a static kind of space, how it's the kind of continuation or relationship to time and space through its the kind of how it works with light. Hopefully we'll kind of create a space that links to the future as well as the past. And that kind of idea of relating to things across time and space. Hopefully that's kind of evident in the way people relate to the moment.
Kim or Aaron, did you want to?
Yeah, in terms of I suppose the first half of the question, yeah, there's a lot of conversation around the Australian War Memorial at the moment in terms of the proposed redevelopment. And I think that from our perspective, that's framed around the purpose of memorials around conflict, and that they shouldn't be celebrations of conflict. They serve an incredibly important purpose to connect to that suffering and to the the real meaning behind those, so that we can learn from those and not repeat certain mistakes of the past. I think some of the resistance to the proposal of the Australian War Memorial is that it's turning into a museum and a celebration of the chatels or the componentry of war, all the military vehicles and things, and that's certainly part of the service, the community of servicemen and women in this war memorial itself. But the memorialization process is an incredibly delicate one, and I think there needs to be a distinction. But I from my perspective, they should be two different buildings or two different sites, because they're serving two very different purposes.
Aaron?
Look, I think that it's an enormous project that's proposed there, and I think we need to be careful around what we're doing at the moment with the memorial. I think there's also been some, I guess, heated debate over the possibility of demolishing what was quite a building that is contributing, or part of the building which is contributing in a major way already. So, look, I think it's a very difficult conversation, and I think one that probably needs to be had again before we move forward. But so, yeah.
Dan, in this work for our country, you're, of course, commemorating the service of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women who've served there, our country. I suppose the big question that probably a lot of people put to you is, what about frontier wars and the fact that the War Memorial still doesn't have a formal memorial? Is that something that you've obviously referenced that in the sort of timelessness of this memorial, but is that something that you would be keen to see at the Australian War Memorial?
I mean, for me, it's about perception, and I kind of I see we kind of reference that in the memorial, and so I think it's all present, and I guess it's just how people perceive it. And, I mean, I do talk about it is about sacrifice every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person made for their country, and it's in
I'm finding that hard to hear. I'm not sure if that's coming through. It's a great big question. I don't know if Kim or Aaron, in terms of further commemoration and of frontier wars, the fact that this land was not ceded, was fought for.
Absolutely.
I think it's
why not? We should be doing it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There shouldn't even be a question about whether we do it or not. In reality, I mean, the idea is that the more that we accept and talk about and dialogue with the realities of our past will only benefit the possibilities of our country moving forward, and truly recognizing a reconciliation process. We need to be far more forward and clear about what's happened, and start to kind of go through that process in a more overt way.
Kim?
Oh, agreed. We've got to expose, the trauma that this country has been built on, so that we can collectively understand it and collectively see it from the same perspective and collectively move on. Reconciliation's not possible unless there's an appropriate truth-telling process. As we spoke about, this memorial doesn't differentiate between sacrifice for frontier wars or formal military service. However, I guess it represents and commemorates that sacrifice for all conflict, but an articulated frontier war memorial from the Australian government at the Australian War Memorial would certainly be a powerful gesture, and we'd support that.
Well, there's no doubt about this work, you know, referencing thousands and thousands of years of culture and ceremony and ritual, which is just, you know, beautiful. I think it's, I can see why you're taking up many of the awards. I urge everyone to go and visit it when they're in Canberra, in the beautiful city of Canberra. Thank you so much for taking part in this Design Canberra session this morning on the first day of the festival. We really appreciate it, and congratulations on this truly beautiful work. And I think the conversation as we all go in, and that, you know, you do ask us to have that personal response as we go into this work, is part of the process of truth telling and taking us forward. So thank you so much. Congratulations to all of you on a truly beautiful work. Thank you very much.
Terrific, thank you, and thanks for having us
Today.
Yeah, well, we love you. Come back to Canberra soon. But thanks to artist Daniel Boyd, and from Editions Office, Aaron Roberts and Kim Bridgland, and talking about the work for our country, which is at the Australian War Memorial, and has just taken out the prestigious Canberra Medallion, and also the Nicholas Merkett Award for Small Project Architecture at the 2020 National Architecture Awards. And this has been a Design Canberra edition today. Thanks so much if you've been attending. Thank you. See you all.
Thank you.